My phone slipped from my flour-dusted fingers, clattering against the kitchen counter. I had just called my mother to ask if I should bring my signature cherry tart or a pecan pie for Christmas dinner. Her response? A casual, breathy laugh followed by, "Oh, we actually did that yesterday." The smell of browned butter, cinnamon, and nutmeg had been filling my small apartment since 6:00 a.m. It was December 24th, Christmas Eve morning, and I was determined to make this year different. I was 32, single again after a grueling divorce, and exhausted from being the family's designated black sheep. I wanted peace. I wanted to walk into my parents' house with a perfect, lattice-crusted cherry tart, smile through my sister's passive-aggressive comments, and just have a normal holiday. I wiped my hands on my apron, picked up my phone from the counter, and dialed my mother, Barbara. The phone rang 3 times before she picked up. "Hello," she answered. There was a weird echo in the background, the clinking of porcelain and the low hum of the television. "Hey, Mom, it's me," I said, wedging the phone between my ear and shoulder as I started crimping the edges of my pie crust. "I'm just finishing up the baking. I know I usually bring the pecan pie, but I was thinking of making that cherry tart Dad loved last Thanksgiving. Which one do you think I should bring tomorrow?" There was a pause. A long, heavy pause, where the only sound was the static of the cellular connection. "Mom?" "Oh," she said, her voice dropping a half octave into that sickly sweet register she uses when she knows she's about to say something awful but wants to sound like the victim. "Oh, Chloe, honey. We actually did that yesterday." My hands stopped moving. The dough beneath my thumbs felt suddenly cold. "Did what yesterday?" "Christmas dinner, sweetie," she said, letting out a short, breathy laugh. "Melanie's in-laws decided they were coming to town today, so we just pushed our family dinner up to the 23rd. It was a last-minute scramble, honestly. You didn't miss much." I stared blankly at the cherry juice staining my wooden cutting board. "You had Christmas dinner, yesterday, without me." "I thought I texted you." She deflected instantly, her voice rising defensively. "I swear I told your brother to text you. Greg is so forgetful. You know how it is, Chloe. It was absolute chaos. Between Melanie's kids running around and David trying to get the turkey carved, it completely slipped our minds to follow up when you didn't RSVP to the text." I pulled the phone away from my ear, swiping down on my screen to open our message thread. The last text from my mother was from 3 weeks ago, asking if I still wore a size medium in sweaters. The last text from my brother, Greg, was a TikTok link from September. "Mom. No one texted me." "Well, you've been so isolated lately, Chloe," she sighed. "The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced. Ever since the divorce, you just pull away from us. We figured you wanted your space this year. You're always so sensitive during the holidays." A cold, hard knot formed in the center of my chest. They hadn't forgotten. "You don't forget to invite your biological daughter to Christmas dinner. You make a choice." "Who was there?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Just family, Chloe. Please don't make a big deal out of this," she pleaded, though I could hear the irritation bubbling beneath her tone. "It was me, your dad, Melanie, David, the kids, Greg, and, well, just the family." It was a very small, quiet thing. She hesitated on the word "and." I caught it. I had spent 32 years decoding Barbara's conversational minefields. "Okay," I said. "Okay? You're not mad?" she asked, sounding relieved. "I'll save you a plate of ham, honey. We can drop it by your apartment next week when the madness dies down." "Don't worry about it, Mom. Merry Christmas," I said and hung up. I stood in my kitchen for a full 5 minutes, staring at the raw pie. The urge to sweep the entire cutting board onto the floor, to smash the flour jar against the wall, was overwhelming. My family had always favored my older sister, Melanie. She was the golden child, who married a wealthy tech consultant, lived in a pristine 5-bedroom house, and popped out 2 photogenic children. I was the middle child, the art teacher who married a charismatic but emotionally abusive man, and then committed the cardinal sin of divorcing him. My family hated my divorce, not because they hurt for me, but because my ex-husband, Ryan, used to pay for their country club memberships and fly them out to Cabo every winter. When I left Ryan, I cut off their gravy train. I was supposed to sit here and cry. I was supposed to let them box me out of my own family. Instead, I looked at the cherry tart. I slid it into the oven, set the timer, and walked to my bedroom to get dressed. If they had Christmas dinner yesterday, the house would still be a mess today. I was going to drive over there. I wasn't going to yell, and I wasn't going to cry. I just wanted to look my parents in the eye and see the guilt they thought they could hide over the phone. I wanted to see the aftermath of the quiet family dinner. I wasn't good enough to attend. The drive to Oakwood Drive took 40 minutes. The snow was falling in thick, heavy clumps, turning the suburban streets into a picturesque holiday greeting card. The kind of greeting card my mother sent out every year, the one that, this year, had mysteriously cropped me out of the family portrait on the back. When I turned onto my parents' street, my heart started hammering against my ribs. I slowed my ancient Honda Civic to a crawl as their two-story colonial came into view. My breath hitched. The driveway was completely full. Dad's sedan was parked near the garage, which was normal, but behind it was Melanie's massive white SUV. Beside that was Greg's beat-up Jeep, and parked illegally on the curb, blocking the mailbox, was a sleek, midnight blue Porsche Panamera. I slammed on the brakes, the tires skidding slightly on the slush. I knew that Porsche. I had ridden in it. I had paid the insurance on it from our joint checking account for 3 years. It was Ryan's car, my ex-husband. My vision tunneled. The pieces of my mother's phone call snapped together with sickening clarity. We pushed it up to the 23rd. Melanie's in-laws. Just family. The hesitation on the phone. The absolute silence from my siblings. They didn't bump Christmas dinner because of Melanie's in-laws. They bumped it so they could invite my ex-husband, the man who had spent 5 years tearing my self-esteem to shreds, who had cheated on me with his paralegal, and they didn't want me there to ruin the vibe. I parked a block away, killed the engine, and stepped out into the freezing cold. I didn't bother grabbing a coat. I couldn't feel the temperature anyway. My entire body was burning with a furious, electric adrenaline. I walked down the sidewalk, keeping out of sight of the large bay windows at the front of the house. I knew the security code to the side garage door. I punched in the numbers 1989, the year Melanie was born, of course, and the lock clicked green. I slipped inside, the heavy door closing silently behind me. The mudroom smelled like expensive cigars and stale champagne. Dozens of coats were piled high on the bench. I crept through the laundry room and stopped just behind the louvered doors that opened into the kitchen. The house was a disaster zone, but the opulent kind. Empty bottles of Camus Vineyards, Cabernet Dad's absolute favorite, at $200 a pop, littered the granite countertops. Half-eaten platters of artisanal cheeses and carved prime rib were shoved haphazardly toward the sink. The quiet family dinner of ham was a flat-out lie. This was a catered $1,000 feast. From the adjacent living room, laughter echoed off the vaulted ceilings. I'm just saying, Ryan, the market is completely volatile right now, but your portfolio is practically bulletproof, I heard my brother Greg say, his voice dripping with sycophantic admiration. It's just about knowing when to pivot, Greg. Ryan's smooth, arrogant baritone floated through the air. My stomach violently turned at the sound of it. Speaking of pivoting, Barbara, this prime rib was phenomenal. So much better than that dry turkey you usually suffer through. Oh, stop it, you, my mother giggled. Giggled. We're just so thrilled you and Brittany could make it. I know you two are incredibly busy with the new house in Aspen. Brittany, the paralegal. I pressed my face against the slats of the door, peering into the living room. The fireplace was roaring. My father, Richard, was sitting in his leather armchair, swirling a glass of scotch, beaming at Ryan like he was the son he'd always wanted. Melanie was sitting cross-legged on the rug, her perfect blonde hair in a messy bun, while she said David showed Brittany something on his phone. Well, we wouldn't miss it, a high-pitched voice chimed in. Brittany. She was wearing a cashmere sweater that hugged a very obvious 5-month baby bump. Ryan practically considers you guys his real parents. And honestly, it is so nice to just relax without any tension. God, tell me about it, Melanie groaned, throwing her head back. Last year was miserable. Chloe just sat in the corner acting like a wounded animal all night. It is so exhausting walking on eggshells around her just because she couldn't make her marriage work. She always was a quitter, my father muttered, taking a sip of his scotch. No grit. Ryan, you gave her the world, and she threw it back in your face over a few misunderstandings. Misunderstandings. He had drained our savings account to buy an apartment for his mistress. He had gaslit me until I was on anxiety medication. And my father, the man who was supposed to protect me, sat there drinking the scotch Ryan bought him, calling my survival quitting. "Let's not talk about her," my mother said dismissively, waving a manicured hand. "Today is about celebrating. Ryan, did you show David the itinerary for the cruise?" I froze. I looked down at the kitchen island. Amidst the empty wine bottles was a glossy printed packet. I silently stepped out of the laundry room and tiptoed to the counter, my eyes scanning the top page. Royal Caribbean. VIP suite booking guest list. Richard, Barbara, Melanie, David, Greg, Ryan, Brittany. Departure. December 26th. They weren't just having dinner without me. They were going on a 10-day, fully paid luxury Caribbean cruise, funded entirely by my ex-husband. They had organized this months ago. The entire family had conspired, hidden it from me, lied to my face, and essentially traded me in for an upgrade. I picked up the itinerary. My hands weren't shaking anymore. A bizarre, terrifying calmness washed over me. I looked at a large, beautifully wrapped gift box sitting on the island, with a tag that read, "To Brittany, for the new baby. Love, Grandma Barb and Grandpa Rich." They were calling themselves the grandparents of my ex-husband's affair baby. I stood in the wreckage of my family's betrayal. I could have turned around. I could have walked out the side door, driven home, eaten my cherry tart alone, and never spoken to them again. That would have been the healthy thing to do. That would have been what my therapist advised. But I didn't want to be healthy right now. I wanted to watch their world burn. I grabbed the heavy, half-empty bottle of Camus by the neck, picked up the glossy cruise itinerary in my other hand, and kicked the louvered doors open with the bottom of my boot. The loud crack of the wood hitting the wall echoed like a gunshot, slicing through the warmth and laughter of the living room. 7 heads snapped toward the kitchen entrance in unison. "Merry Christmas, family," I said, stepping into the light. The silence that followed my entrance was so absolute, so heavy, you could have heard a snowflake hit the roof. For 10 agonizing seconds, no one breathed. My mother's hand froze halfway to her face, her meticulously applied blush suddenly clashing with the chalky white pallor of her skin. Melanie's jaw actually dropped, her eyes darting frantically between me and the louvered doors, as if calculating how I had managed to bypass their security perimeter. Brittany instinctively threw a protective hand over her cashmere-clad baby bump, looking at me like I was a home invader holding a weapon. I suppose, in a way, I was. Chloe, my father, Richard, was the first to speak. He set his crystal scotch glass on the mahogany side table with a sharp clink. He stood up, his face flushing with an ugly, defensive red. "What the hell is the meaning of this? You can't just break into our home." "Break in?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm. I stepped fully into the living room, my boots leaving small, wet tracks on the Persian rug. I used the code DAD, Melanie's birth year. It's always been Melanie's birth year. And I thought I was just dropping by to pick up my plate of leftover ham, but it looks like I stumbled into a Bon Voyage party instead. I tossed the glossy Royal Caribbean itinerary onto the glass coffee table. It landed with a soft, damning smack right next to the plate of artisanal cheeses. My mother let out a small, strangled gasp. "Chloe, honey, please. Let me explain." "Explain what, Barb?" I cut her off. I didn't call her Mom. I couldn't. Explain how my RSVP got lost in the mail for a 10-day VIP cruise departing the day after Christmas. Or explain how my ex-husband is sitting in my father's chair, drinking my father's liquor, while his pregnant mistress accepts gifts from the grandparents of the year. "Don't you speak to your mother that way," Greg interjected, puffing out his chest as he stood up from the sofa. "You're acting crazy, Chloe. This is exactly why we didn't want you here. You always have to make everything a massive drama." "Oh, I'm the drama?" I laughed, a short, sharp sound that made Greg flinch. I walked slowly toward the kitchen island, bringing the heavy bottle of Camus with me, and retrieved the wrapped box. I walked back into the living room and held it out toward Brittany. "Open it, Brittany. Show everyone what Grandma and Grandpa bought for the baby." Brittany shrank back into the cushions, her lip trembling in a practiced display of victimhood. "Ryan, make her stop," she whispered. Ryan finally stood up. He smoothed the front of his designer trousers, shooting me that familiar, condescending smirk, the one that used to make me doubt my own sanity. "Chloe, you're embarrassing yourself," Ryan said, his voice dripping with faux pity. I know it hurts to see that everyone has moved on, but you have to stop projecting your bitterness onto your family. They deserve to be happy. They deserve to be taken care of. Something you were never willing to do. Taken care of, I repeated, tasting the words. I looked at my parents. They were nodding along with him. They actually believed this man was their savior. Dad, is that what you think? That Ryan takes care of you? He's been more of a son to us than you've been a daughter lately, my father spat, crossing his arms. He paid for a new roof on this house last month. He's taking us on a vacation we haven't been able to afford in a decade. He respects us, he conned. He bought you, I corrected softly. I set the baby gift down and gripped the neck of the wine bottle with both hands. He bought your loyalty, because if you all abandoned me, it validated what he did. It made him the good guy. He gets to walk away from destroying my life, and you all pat him on the back and validate his ego because he threw a few crumbs of his wealth your way. It's more than you ever did, Melanie shrieked, finally breaking her silence. God, Chloe, you are so selfish. You ruined the family dynamic when you divorced him. We all loved Ryan, and you didn't even try to work it out. You just walked away. Why shouldn't we still be a family? The sheer audacity of her words washed over me, but instead of making me angry, it crystallized my resolve. They didn't know. Ryan had lied to them, and I had protected his ego in the divorce because I just wanted out. You think I walked away because I was selfish? I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper that forced them all to lean in. I turned my gaze entirely onto Ryan. His smirk began to falter. The color was slowly draining from his cheeks. Chloe, that's enough. Leave, Ryan ordered, his voice suddenly sharp. Tell them, Ryan, I challenged. Tell us what? My mother asked, looking frantically between the two of us. He didn't tell you about the NDA, did he? I smiled. A genuine, terrifying smile. In our divorce settlement, Ryan insisted on a non-disclosure agreement. I wasn't allowed to discuss his finances with anyone. But the thing about NDAs, Ryan, is that they only cover civil matters. They don't apply when federal crimes are involved. The room temperature seemed to plunge by 10 degrees. Greg stopped puffing his chest. David, Melanie's husband, slowly put down his phone. What are you talking about? My father demanded, his voice losing its arrogant edge. Ryan isn't a tech consultant anymore, Dad. He got fired from his firm 2 years ago. Right before the divorce, I said, watching Ryan's face turn the color of ash. His bulletproof portfolio? It's a Ponzi scheme. He's been moving client funds into his personal accounts to maintain his lifestyle, to buy the Porsche, to rent the Aspen house, to buy your new roof, and this ridiculous cruise. You're lying, Melanie gasped, though she took a step away from Ryan. She's lying, right, Ryan? Tell her she's just a jealous, bitter ex-wife. Ryan swallowed hard. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The suave, arrogant man who had just been holding court in my father's living room looked like a cornered rat. I received a subpoena on Wednesday, I continued, speaking clearly and deliberately to my parents. The SEC and the IRS are auditing everything that had my name attached to it. Fortunately, I have a paper trail proving I was utterly isolated from his finances. I am completely clean. I paused, letting the silence stretch out, watching the horror bloom in my parents' eyes. But you aren't, I whispered to my father. He paid for your roof? Direct wire transfer? He's taking you on a 10-day cruise? Paid for with embezzled funds. When the feds freeze his assets, which my lawyer says will likely happen by next Tuesday, they will claw back every single dollar he gifted to friends and family. They will place a lien on this house, Dad. You are going to be investigated as accomplices to wire fraud. My mother let out a loud, piercing sob, collapsing back onto the sofa. No, no, Richard, tell me she's making this up. My father stared at Ryan. Ryan? Tell me this is a sick joke. Ryan looked at the floor, his breathing shallow and rapid. I was going to fix it. The market just took a downturn. I just needed a little more time to move the funds back. Oh my God, Brittany shrieked, clutching her stomach. Are we broke? Ryan, are we broke? I didn't stay to hear the rest of his excuses. The chaotic symphony of their collapsing world was already starting to play. I didn't immediately leave. I just stood by the kitchen island, leaning against the cold granite, watching the spectacular, chaotic collapse of the pedestal my family had built for my abuser. My father, Richard, was the first to react. The deep flush of his face extended all the way down his neck. He stepped toward Ryan, his crystal Scotch glass shaking violently in his hand. "You son of a bitch," my father hissed, his voice dropping into a guttural growl I hadn't heard since Greg totaled the family car in high school. "I wired you $40,000. That was from my retirement account, Ryan. You told me it was a bridge loan for a tech acquisition. You said I'd see a 20% return by February." "Richard, please. You have to understand the market liquidity right now," Ryan started, his voice cracking. The smooth baritone he used to manipulate boardrooms, and my mother was entirely gone. "Don't give me that corporate bullshit," my father roared, slamming the glass down on the side table so hard the crystal shattered, sending amber liquid in shards across the Persian rug. Beside him, Melanie was furiously slapping her husband David's arm. "David, call Peterson right now," she shrieked. David looked completely paralyzed, his face drained of blood. "Mel, it's Christmas Eve. My lawyer isn't going to pick up." He looked up at Ryan, a unique, terrifying panic wide in his eyes. "Ryan, the 50 grand we gave you for the Aspen down payment. Tell me that's in escrow. Tell me you didn't touch it." Ryan's silence was the loudest sound in the room. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing, unable to meet David's eyes. "Oh my God," Brittany wailed, hyperventilating as she sank onto the sofa. "The Aspen house. We don't even own the Aspen house. Ryan, what about the nursery? Where is our money?" "It's tied up," Ryan finally shouted, the mask slipping completely to reveal the desperate fraud underneath. "Everyone just shut up. It's tied up in margin calls. If you give me 3 weeks, I can cycle it back through a shell account." "A shell account?" Greg echoed, backing away as if Ryan were suddenly radioactive. "You're talking about money laundering. I'm not going to federal prison for you. I just got my real estate license." They were tearing each other apart. That was the tragic beauty of conditional love based on status and wealth. The absolute second the check bounces, the loyalty evaporates. I had spent years thinking I was the problem. Now, the truth was blindingly clear. They didn't love Ryan. They loved his money. I was simply the collateral damage in their mutual, toxic transaction. "Merry Christmas, everyone," I said, my voice carrying easily over the symphony of their panic. None of them looked at me. My father was practically at Ryan's throat, and my mother was sobbing into her hands on the sofa. I turned my back, walked through the kitchen, pushed open the mudroom door, and stepped out into the freezing December afternoon. The snow was falling heavier now, but I didn't feel the cold. The suffocating weight I had been carrying on my chest for 5 years was entirely gone. I had left it on my father's living room floor. I started my ancient Honda Civic and drove back to my apartment in total silence, letting the adrenaline slowly filter out of my bloodstream. When I unlocked my front door, the smell of browned butter, cinnamon, and baked cherries wrapped around me like a physical embrace. My oven timer was just beginning to beep. I pulled on my oven mitts, opened the door, and slid out the cherry tart. The lattice crust was a perfect golden brown, the red fruit bubbling thickly. I set it carefully on the stove to cool. My phone, sitting on the counter, began to buzz violently. "Mom, 1:14 p.m. Chloe, please answer. We need your lawyer's number. Dad is having a panic attack." "Mom, 1:15 p.m. Ryan left in the Porsche. David is calling the police. You have to help us." "Melanie, 1:16 p.m. Chloe, pick up. What exactly is the SEC looking for?" I stared at the screen, watching the 3 little dots bubble up as my mother typed yet another frantic message, desperate to pull me back into the chaos. I opened my mother's contact card, scrolled to the very bottom, and tapped block caller. Then I did the same for my father. Then Melanie. Then Greg. I placed the phone face down. The silence in my apartment was profound. I went to the cupboard, pulled out my favorite ceramic dessert plate, and cut myself a massive, steaming slice of the cherry tart. I didn't need to bring dessert to a family that didn't want me. I had baked it for myself. I sat down at my small kitchen table, took a bite, and watched the snow fall outside my window. It was the best thing I had ever tasted. If Chloe's story resonated with you, you know how hard it can be to walk away from toxic dynamics even when it's family. Sometimes, the best holiday gift you can give yourself is the peace of letting go and walking away from tables where you are no longer valued. Please like this video, Share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own worth this holiday season, and subscribe for more real life stories of resilience, drama, and taking back your power.